Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of 5 Facts. Today, we're going to be talking about one of the biggest sci fi horror classics of all time, 1979's Alien. Part of the reason why we're bringing this up right now is that it's getting another sequel. Alien Covenant is coming out in just a few short weeks. Looks like it's going to be good, or at least it's going to be back to having real aliens on the screen. Not like some of the stuff that happened in Prometheus. This movie is one of Ridley Scott's biggest masterpieces. I put it up there with Gladiator and many other of his really, really strong movies. It's all the way back in 1979, so one of his earlier films, and it just holds up so well. I can't overstate the importance of this movie for just sci-fi, for horror in general. Not only was it one of the first to have a major female protagonist come out of it, but it was one of the movies that kind of set the bar much higher for horror, for monster movies, for just extraterrestrials. It's an amazing take on what it would be like to have a parasitic, kind of carnivorous alien on board of a ship, and just how claustrophobic space can be. It also spawned a series that would go on to explore what would happen if you had multiples of these aliens, if there were different experiments. And the coolest thing about that is you got to see like the action movie aspect of it. You got to see horror, you got to see a little bit of different drama aspects. And even if it did go off the rails at certain points, there's a lot of fascinating stuff that's been done with the alien creature. Without further ado, let's get to the facts. Fact number 1. Ridley Scott is ridiculously detail-oriented and filmed most of this movie. Ridley Scott wanted to get the right feel for this movie, and as a young director, he wanted to make sure he was getting all the angles that he wanted. Most of this movie was shot from a shoulder-mounted camera. This was also important since the actual set design for the Nostromo was a very large set with long corridors. It wasn't as segmented as a lot of movie sets are, so you had to actually get in there behind the actors for a lot of these rooms. On top of all this, he knew he wasn't going to have a lot of time to explore the backgrounds of certain characters, so he gave everyone, all 7 of the people on the crew, very detailed backstories, birthdays, anniversaries, stories about their childhood, stories about who they are, what they're like, and just a giant biography for all of these characters so that they could get into their character without having to do expositional dumps or anything like that. It just really allowed the actors to get deep into these roles without having to put a lot of screen time on developing. Fact number 2. The Chestburster scene was inspired by a type of wasp. When you talk about the most memorable scenes in horror, inevitably the Chestburster scene is going to come up. It's not just the stories behind it about how the actors weren't ready, they didn't know what was happening, so their reactions are authentic and real. It's just an entirely visceral thing that is so painful to watch, so gory, so bloody, and just perfectly orchestrated. Especially with the acting that John Hurt was able to put in with this performance. The writer of this script, Dan O'Bannon, said that he was inspired by a certain type of wasp that would go and lay eggs inside of spiders, and eventually they would eat their way out as larvae. He had nightmares about this. It was just a terrifying thought, and he knew he had to put it into a movie at some point. The 2 species that do this are Brachionoid and Ichinumon wasps, and they are absolutely violent and terrifying. It's a really horrible thing. Dan O'Bannon actually had an idea for a different type of wasp that actually laid the eggs on the back of a spider, and it would do almost the same thing, but these ones are the ones that actually get inside of a caterpillar or a spider or various other creatures to lay their eggs. Fact number 3. The spacesuits for this movie were hell to work in. There's a lot of scenes where you see people out of the space shuttle or in the space jockey shuttle. And these spacesuits look really cool, but they were absolutely terrible to work in. Most of the time it was almost 100 degrees on the set because of the lighting and everything else that was going on. And Tom Seacrest, John Hurt, and Veronica Cartwright had to get into these suits for long periods at a time. They spent a good portion of this actually passed out. It got so bad that they had to have a nurse on set to resuscitate them and make sure that they were hydrated the whole time. It wasn't until Ridley Scott and the cinematographer's kids decided to try these suits that they decided they should probably make some changes to give them a little more ventilation. Turns out having your kids pass out in a suit is a good way to show the director that it's not quite working. From what I was reading, it sounded like the alien suit wasn't much better. There was a lot of latex, there were 3 different heads, and it was just extremely uncomfortable. The actor actually ended up having to get a very strange sling so he could sit down between takes, because the tail wouldn't let him sit in a conventional chair, and he basically had to kind of sprawl backwards and do his thing that way. Fact number 4. Getting the facehuggers and the eggs right took an incredible amount of work. I remember as an 8-year-old watching as the egg opened up and you just watch all these things move around perfectly and just launch out at Kane. It was absolutely terrifying. It was one of the scariest things I saw as a kid and had me creeped out for of the dark for quite a long time after that. Everything about the Facehugger is meant to creep you out. A lot of it is designed to give a very rape-like experience. Like, you've got the long, bony fingers coming together like this, and that's just part of it. It's the forced impregnation. It's the way that it just forces itself on you and you can't stop it. The way it puts something in you. And part of the reason why they went into this and actually chose a male character is they didn't want to fall into the horror trope of, like, women giving birth to, like, the monster or anything like that, so they decided to go with Kane for this. Originally, these facehuggers were actually meant to be green, but after seeing the models, which were kind of human flesh colored, Ridley Scott and the other people on set decided that that was a little bit more disconcerting. For the scene in which the facehugger actually attacks, it's filmed upside down. For the scene in which the facehugger actually attacks, these eggs had to be filmed upside down. It allowed the puppet master inside to actually reach in and just jam the alien out and make it have a more natural movement. If you look closely, sometimes you can actually see a drop of slime go the wrong direction. All the slime for this movie, including the slime that was used on the alien, is actually KY jelly. It's not just for the bedroom. While we're on the topic of eggs, a lot of this was actually done with innards from sheep and cattle. Like, I believe it's a cow's stomach, and Ridley Scott using his own hands to manipulate and move to make it look like there's gestation happening inside of there. The dead facehugger was actually made to look even more gruesome by using about 4 different shellfish, a bunch of oysters, and a sheep kidney to give it kind of a different feel for guts. They wanted it to be natural. Fact number 5. The 4th act ending was going to be much more brutal. Most times a movie like this would end as soon as Ripley got off the shuttle. It would just be her going off into space and she'd be completely fine. In this movie, though, Ridley Scott wanted something a little bit extra. He called up Fox and he wanted $500,000 more to film one last scene, or one last set of scenes that would end up capping this movie off perfectly in his head. Unfortunately, he got a little overzealous with it. He wanted to have a terrible ending for Ripley. He intended for the alien to get on there, literally decapitate her with its bare hands, and then go to the captain's chair and use Dallas's voice to do kind of a sign-off indicating that the alien was going to go wherever the ship was and it was going to ambush the next crew. The alien in this was a little bit more sadistic than the other aliens, or the other alien movies, because those were mostly predators. This one was kind of out to hurt people and kill people in a different way. Doesn't quite show through because of a lot of the cuts that were made for this movie, but that ending would have definitely shown it. Ridley Scott admits that the ending with Ripley getting away, especially having that hard-earned victory, was ultimately the right choice. It was only the studio that stopped him, because they were the ones that said they would not give him money if the alien didn't die. Sometimes studio meddling is alright. Alien just changed horror. Like, you look at so many movies from this era, and we've reviewed a lot on here, they're usually a little bit lower budget. They're a little bit, like, they get campy, they get weird, they get, like, a little bit choppy with the scripts. But the amount of love and effort that went into this movie is so apparent. And it's quite frankly inspiring. This is a movie that I've based a lot of my writing off of. It's the type of dark storytelling that I like, the brutality, and everything else. And it could have easily slipped into those categories. Like, originally the movie was going to be called They Bite, or things like that, and it would become just kind of a parody of itself just by not having that noun. Like, I guess alien works as both a noun and a verb for this, too. It's amazing that a movie that only features 4 minutes of the actual alien being on screen is this popular, this powerful, and this sinister. Like, you think of how they're just watching radar, and just the little blips become absolutely horrifying as you feel the alien getting closer, as you feel just how small it is in this gigantic ship, and how little options these people really have. It's completely fascinating. It was perfectly done, and I'm so glad that we were able to get Aliens and even Alien 3 after this. I have a lot of hope for Alien Covenant coming up. It is Ridley Scott returning to this world. It looks like he's going to deliver more like Alien than like Prometheus, so we're going to be checking that out. I want to hear from all you guys about what you thought of Alien the first time you saw it, if you think it holds up different facts that you might know about it, because there's so many. Like, even if you're on IMDb trivia, it's just pages and pages and pages of facts. There's so much cool stuff about this movie. I want to hear what it was like whenever you first watched it. I want to hear just your experiences with Alien. Thank you all for watching this edition of 5 Facts. If you enjoyed this, or like movie reviews in general, be sure to check out the Human Echoes podcast, either through app stores or at humanechoes.com, or even on this YouTube channel. Be sure to like, subscribe, leave a comment, and we will see you next time.